So today we're going to do a desktop build. So you start with the case, then you have your power supply, your motherboard, which is the LGA 1200 for the processor, and then the processor, RAM, hard drive, CD-ROM if you have one. A lot of people choose not to. And then a wireless adapter so that you can put the desktop anywhere in the home you'd like. So, okay, let's get into it. We're going to remove the side panel by these two screws in the back. A lot of side panels have a clear see-through glass so that you can see in and see all the components inside. But go ahead and remove both sides, both panels. Total of 4 screws. Once you've done that, inside the case there is going to be a little bag full of the screws that you need and the inserts that you need. A lot of gaming cases will not have this section here. That will be not there so that the fans, the cooling fans, the CPU coolers, the water coolers and things like that can fit in this area here. So this is just a standard desktop for a client. So with this desktop, you can see there's only 3 of those standoff screws. The reason for that is because, as you can see, the case itself has raised up the spots where you can connect the motherboard. And so you only would need these 3 different ones if you had a full ATX. We have a micro motherboard, so with the motherboard there will come a cutout right here that goes in the back of your desktop that is specific for your motherboard. Each one is unique to the motherboard that you have purchased. No screws or anything like that, it just pops right into the spot. Once it's in, it should look like that. Remember that your audio devices should be on the right hand side, so it's always the same direction. You don't want to install it upside down. Once you've done that, you want to put your motherboard in ever so carefully, making sure that your ports line up here at the bottom. So bear with me while I put this in here. And so now you're ready to go ahead and put the screws in because you have everything lined up. Go ahead and mount your screws. Those will be those little gold spots on the motherboard, so they're pretty easy to see. So you can see how I've already put a screw in there. There'll be another one that goes there. So just look for those holes where the screws go in those different areas of your motherboard. So now we're ready to install the processor. You want to remove your little dust cutout here, and then you want to take this little lever right here and pull it back, and then that enables you to pull this back right here so that you can put your processor in. So there are 2 notches on the bottom side of the processor. Those are important because it can only go one way in the motherboard. So go ahead and place your processor directly on into the spot where the processor goes, and notice those notches have now lined up to where that sits in there really nicely. So now you can go ahead and close this back up, pull this lever back, and then back forward, push down, out, and then underneath, and that holds the CPU in place. At this point you can apply some CPU putty, which is to cool the processor and bond with your processor cooler or your CPU fan. If this is just a standard PC that's not used for gaming, the CPU putty that's bonded to the CPU cooler fan would be sufficient enough so that you don't have to add any. However, if you're a gamer, definitely using more CPU putty would be recommended. On the board itself, not quite sure if you'll be able to make that out, but it says CPU fan there at the top. So that's where we're going to plug in this little wire right here. Obviously in the packaging you can see that it has come loose, and you definitely don't want this wire to be anywhere near the path of this fan to where the fan can't spin. So make sure you work your wire around the outside of the fan to make sure that it clears it and that the fan can spin without touching. You can see how it's not spinning around because of the fact that this wire is not out of the way. However, once you get the wire out of the way and you work this out, then it will spin freely. As you can see, once you've worked this wire around, then the fan spins freely. Then what you want to do is these 4 tabs, you want to press down in alternate sides. So you want to start with the first one and press down as far as you can. Then the second one over here, you'll hear 2 clicks. You definitely want to listen for those clicks. And then over here is the last one. Hear those 2 clicks? You want those to be there. That confirms that it is completely on top of that processor and bonded in a way that there's no airflow that's getting in between the fan and the processor, and it's completely pulling all of that heat up and out of the case through the back fan right here. In some cases, like gaming coolers, they'll have fans at the top as well, and even in the front. We are ready for the RAM to go in, and one thing to note, it can only go in one way. These notches are not even, so it can only go in one direction. You want to pull your tabs out to make sure that you can go ahead and put that in. When the RAMs are pushed in correctly, the tab will come forward. Now, your motherboard manual will have the layout of your RAM. It's important to note here that you want to, I have 2 sticks of RAM, so I want to stagger between the first one and the third one and leave the second one and the fourth one open for future expansion. But refer to your motherboard manual just to make sure. Now, I bought a kit, and so there's 2 4GB sticks here, and what's important to note is that your machine will not work correctly if you've got different brands and different speeds of RAM. So make sure all the RAM that's going in there is the exact same brand, the exact same speed, and the exact same size all the way through the board. You've got the RAM in the slots. You want to make sure that you press down evenly on both sides. Now I'm going to use 2 hands to do this, but you want to put a thumb here and a thumb here and press down evenly at the same time to get a good connection. Once it's in, it should look like that. Remember, you're staggering the 2 different sticks. Obviously, if you have all 4, then it wouldn't matter because again, you would have the exact same size speed for all 4 sticks. So in this case, we are using a 500GB Western Digital Black. Notice that it says read speeds up to 3430 megabits per second. By contrast, a standard solid state drive is 550 megabits per second. So it's about 7 times faster than a normal SSD. And since we have M.2 slots underneath this armor and also right here, we can go ahead and utilize that M.2 solid state drive technology. So it's important to note that inside your processor box will be a pamphlet, and that has your sticker. So if you want to proudly display your processor type on your case, that is where your sticker will be. In this case, we are using a 10th generation i5 processor. It is 6 cores with 2 threads, so we're a total of 12 threads, and we have, you notice it says LGA 1200. That is the type of motherboard. So if you don't get the correct motherboard with the correct processor, you will be very frustrated once you've received all of your parts from shipping. Look for packaging in your motherboard that has the tiny M.2 screw to attach the M.2 solid state drive to the motherboard off of this standoff right here next to the battery. So on my board I have two M.2 ports. One is here next to the processor and the other is here. Now you notice the one says Ultra M.2, and that's a terminology just by this manufacturer, ASRock. But as it turns out, the Ultra M.2 is 46% faster than the standard M.2. So obviously I'm going to be putting my SSD M.2 in the Ultra and then screwing that with that screw I mentioned earlier. Another reason I like using this slot is it's further away from the processor and all that heat. So that's also a bonus. Also, the next generation of Wi-Fi is connected by these M.2 connections, which then go out to the side, to the back of the panel, and then have antennas connected to them so that they can get Wi-Fi 6 and the next generation of Wi-Fi. In this case, I'm actually going to be using just a USB 3.0 wireless adapter. This will be more than sufficient with it being AC 1200 for my client. Sometimes it's very difficult to see the writing on the motherboard. I usually use the manual to find out where my different headers are going to be. So the case comes with all of these wires that need to connect to these small little pins on the motherboard, which are right there. And so what you want to do is you want to look at the layout, and then each individual wire will be labeled with the associated, see if I can get that, with the associated position. So you have your power LED, you have your power switch, and your reset button. So these have to be in the correct pin locations, and again, refer to your motherboard manual. Another trick that I have done over the years is to basically get as close as you can, zoom in, and take a picture of your headers. Make sure you have proper lighting, because this can get a little tricky in terms of putting these headers on and sliding them in to make sure they're all the way seated in there. We have your USB 3.0 cable connection. You notice how it has a notch in the middle on one side and not on the other. You want to put that in that notch right there, in the space in between your SATA connections and your power port. So it just pushes straight down Obviously, again, it'll only go one direction with that notch being the way it is. And there you have your connection. That will serve as front USB 3.0 connections. I've got a little space here in the side where I can do my cable management later. We will have one slot right here that will go for the CD-ROM because the customer wants a CD-ROM. Next we have the HD audio that is going to go on the back corner here on this particular board, but again, look at your motherboard manual to make sure. Now if you notice on this cable, one of the pins is blocked out, and so one of the pins is missing right here, so it can only go one way. And last but not least, we have our USB cable. Again, there is only one notch that's missing, so it can only go one spot. And it can go in either one of these two ports. I'm just going to put it in the first one and push it in just like that, and that's it. So obviously our build is coming along. Notice that I have waited to put the power supply in, and that's with good reason. It has so many wires, bulky, and it's hard to maneuver the case once the weight of the power supply is in there. So I usually always save that for last. We still need to go ahead and put in the CD-ROM. So on the front of the case, you can see that we have the USB 3.0 and the regular standard USB. Really the only difference is if you're transferring a flash drive and it has USB 3.0 technology, you definitely want to use that port because it's way faster with the transfer rates. And then of course you have your audio, which is your headphones and your microphone there. So we're going to pick on this top spot right here for our CD-ROM, so you can just kind of push it out and you can kind of work it back and forth, and then it'll just kind of pop out. So I'll pop that out and install the CD-ROM. So these side connections you can just turn and they will come off. So you just want to give those a nice turn and they will pop loose just like that, and then you're able to slide your CD-ROM in. Make sure you don't have any on the other side. In this case I do not, and you're able to go ahead and slide your CD-ROM in. Now you want to work it to where this is flush and it's not sticking out in any way like that. So now that I have it flush, it almost looks like it came with the case, and you can see both here and here that I can go ahead and put that plastic piece back on, turn it, and it will pop that into place. No screws necessary. You can certainly use screws here, but they're just trying to make it easier for somebody to just pop devices in and out. That way, if it ever needs replaced, you can do so pretty simple. Now I've got that in there, and you can see it's not moving around or anything, and it's secure. These other slots down here would be for a regular 3.5 inch hard drive, the standard. So if you wanted to have or add an additional hard drive, you could put these down here. These are for the 2.5, which is your standard SSDs. So, you know, there's a lot of room for expansion in this particular case. I mean, you could look at adding up to like 5 hard drives in here, maybe even 6 if your motherboard supported it. Here we have the Thermaltake 500 watt power supply. Notice it's the ultra quiet, so that will be nice and quiet for the customer to have a smooth running machine, and all the fans should be relatively quiet for him so that he can get his work done. So on your power supply, you want to make sure that the fan is facing down so that it can vent out the bottom Another thing too, when you're placing this desktop, it needs to be on a hard surface. If you put it on carpet, there's nowhere for that heat to go because the fan is not coming out the back. It's actually coming out of the bottom right here. Find your screws and go ahead and take and connect your 4 screws. I got one more to go right here. So I have fed the cables and done some wire management and got my main power connector. Again, there's a tab on the outside so it can only go one way. The next thing I've got to do is connect this to that and then do some cable management so that that cable is out of the way and not just going straight across here and looking all sad. As you can see on the case, there is a fan that goes to the fan port, which is right there. Has a little notch on it, so you just put it in. The 4th pin will be actually not used, and so that's how it'll be. And then of course I will do some cable management to get this cable out of the way so you can see the motherboard nicely when you open up the case. So I have already connected my power to my SATA ports in the back of my CD-ROM, also my SATA cable. I am going to plug in my SATA cable to port number 0 and wait for it to click. And so you can see, you can hear it click there. And another thing too is that this SSD takes up SATA port 3, so make sure if you've got other things that you're connecting on the SATA ports to skip number 3 or whatever your motherboard says in your manual. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3. It can be different SATA ports, so refer to your manual for that. But we're ready to go. I have taken my additional cables that I'm not using, and around the back side I have tie wrapped them together, and I'm just going to put them in this little area here so they're out of the way. Okay, and then I'll do some more wire management through here, and then we can go ahead and put the side panel back on and fire this up and get into some of the motherboard BIOS settings. I have done some wire management around the back side of the case, and then if we slide it around to the other side, you can see everything is pretty much tucked away out of the way so that anything I would need to work on in the future, the motherboard and everything is nice and neat and laid out. So we're ready to go ahead and turn this thing on, connect it to a monitor, and look at our BIOS settings and make sure that our temperatures are correct with our CPU and everything is working fine. It's seeing the RAM and it's making sure that it goes to the proper speeds for the RAM. So we'll get into that later. So I have put the back cover on and snipped off all my excess wire tie, and now we are ready to turn the machine on. Don't forget to put your little sticker on if you so desire to show your generation of processor. It's a good idea not to throw your boxes away until you've thoroughly tested your machine. That's a big mistake that I made early on. When you have a defect in any of the equipment, you certainly don't want to be not having that box available if they are requiring it for an RMA or a return. So now we are ready to turn the device on. There is a toggle switch in the back for the power supply. You can see right away that we have our LED lights illuminating from the motherboard. So now we're ready to come up top, turn the power button on. We want to make sure right away that our fans are spinning both for the case and for the CPU. And as we can see, the motherboard is coming up. So the motherboard is here. We can see our processor, i5 2.9. We can see our 2 sticks of RAM on A1 and B1 respectively. The second set, if we upgrade later down the road, would be on A2 and B2. Our CPU fan is right here. You can see that that's running fine, and our CPU temperature is also fine. And it downgraded my RAM. You can see there it says 2666, and that's okay. I've got actually RAM in there that's much higher than that, but it's going to go automatically downgrade it to what is sufficient for a standard user, which is totally fine by me. So everything looks good in the settings. You want to check your date and time. You know, if you need to adjust that, you certainly can. And we're good from here. So now we can go ahead and start on installing the operating system. So if we look at our SATA ports here, you can see that on SATA number 0 is our DVD, and then down here on our second M.2 is our Western Digital device. So it is seeing both of those devices, and so we can go ahead and start with the operating system. Now I have loaded the latest Windows 10 20H2 feature version of Windows 10 Home onto this flash drive. A lot of people want to go ahead and boot from a CD, and that's fine as well, but it is a lot easier with the flash drive to go ahead and just select the USB to boot first, and then it can just load everything from there. So I have just rebooted the machine with the USB 2.0 flash drive, and we'll see what happens. So you can see after a little bit of a delay, it comes up and it has my Windows installation. So I'll go through the Windows installation. Obviously we're going to click install now. It's going to go through and ask me to accept or ask for a product key. So I got to go ahead and get my Windows activation product key and go from there. Once you enter the product key, you are now ready to go ahead and proceed with the installation. You want to do a custom install here, and you want to make sure that your drive is populating. Notice that the size here is not 500 gigs. It says 465. It's not an exact science. It's usually a good bit less than what is advertised on the outside of the box. Go ahead and click next, and if you want to build partitions here, you can, but I usually always just go ahead and just install it straight from the raw drive and let it build it accordingly. This process, depending on if it's a laptop or a desktop or how fast the CPU and the RAM is, will go either slower or faster. I've seen it take up to 15 minutes on a slow laptop. As you can tell, it's moving right along and it'll be done in no time. It's then going to reboot and load. Once it gets to this screen, you can go ahead and remove your flash drive because all of the files have been loaded. It then will reboot and load directly from that hard drive what had just been loaded on it with that flash drive, which is the rest of the Windows 10. It'll reboot several times and load while it's loading Windows. Don't be alarmed by this. To be quite honest, the Windows 10 loads incredibly fast compared to previous operating systems like Windows Vista and Windows 7. Obviously here you would choose the United States, and then it's going to say whether you want English, keyboard layout, US. Obviously you skip your second keyboard layout, and then it's going to go into connecting to a network. You want to skip this because if you connect to a network right here, it's going to automatically ask you for a Microsoft account. And if you don't have one, you're kind of stuck in the installation. So I always say I don't have internet at first. You can always go back and add that later. It's going to say, are you sure? Because it wants you to have that full Microsoft Security, you're going to click on Continue with Limited Setup, and then you can name your PC whatever you want. You can see here the activity for the hard drive, so that's another thing that you can see that I connected those cables correctly. Now we are ready to go ahead and insert this USB 3.0, but we want to make sure that the drivers for the 3.0 ports are in there, and so we can do that by using the motherboard CD and load those drivers. As you can see, once it came out to the desktop, it already has the latest version of Edge because this is the most recent copy of Windows. So when I go to get updates, I'm going to get a tremendously less amount of updates rather than using a disk, which most of the Windows 10 disks are 2015. So if you use a disk, you're going to have to load all those updates. By using the download tool and using the flash drive, I'm able to bypass all of those steps. So what you want to do here is you want to click on the file folder and then right click on this PC and go to Properties, and then you can get to your device manager right here, and as you can see there are many drivers that are missing, so that's when you can go ahead and load your CD from the manufacturer and get those drivers in. Now you can also get these drivers from the Windows Update. I just prefer to go ahead and get those specific ones that I'm needing. In this case it's going to be the PCI controllers for the USB ports. Also, this is another way to test my CD-ROM to make sure it's working. It should auto boot just like always, and then I can get into loading those drivers. As you can see, it's loading up, and then I'm going to go in and specifically choose. See, if you just click install here, then you can't specifically choose which ones. So what I do is I go to drivers and software and look for my specific drivers that I want, so that you don't have to install all of them. And what will happen if you do that, if you click on install all, it will load software like Norton and things like that that you may not want on your machine. Now as you can see, all the drivers are installed in the device manager. I have plugged in my USB 3.0 wireless adapter, and it immediately was able to load the drivers. And now when I click here, I can see my wireless access point. I'll go ahead and load my password. Click connect, and I will be connected to the internet. At this point I can go ahead and remove my driver CD. Now that I'm connected, I can right click on this PC, go to Properties, and right here I can go in and click Change Product Key here, and you can see that Windows is activated with a digital license. So we are good to go. We can at this point go ahead and start getting updates. To get updates, it's real simple. Just start typing the word update in the search bar at the bottom left and click on check for updates. It'll go through and find all of the updates and start installing them, and you can see how fast it's moving, and that's just the speed of the PC. It's very quick, and the internet connection. Also, as you can see, all 12 threads are showing up in the processor section of the device manager. And once you get your updates, you are good to go, and enjoy your desktop PC. I will put the side panel on, and everything else is good to go. Thanks for watching. Please remember to subscribe to my channel and like and share. That would help me out a lot. I appreciate it, and thanks again for watching. I know this was a lengthy video, but I really feel like a lot of people can learn a lot from it. Thanks again. Thanks again for watching, and please remember to subscribe.